Namo Buddhaya, Namaste, and welcome to my kuti here in Ketohali. I had to think there where I am. And Sunday morning, I'll make this, if we need to call it anything, a relaxed time to answer questions, talk about the comments anyway. As I settle in to my place here for the Vasa, the 3 months rain retreat, which began a few days ago and will continue until the full moon of October, the very end of October that is. So at this beginning of 3 months, I'm just establishing a routine, which doesn't take long because it's much the same as my previous routine. I wake up at 3, meditate. Here we have morning puja at 6 a.m. and this comprises chanting. I will bring some of that to you in due course. Then I go on alms round, pindapat, with my alms bowl, to the local village. This is just an opportunity to be seen as a monk, a samana, living in the area, therefore inviting inquiry, inviting interest in Buddhism. It isn't for the sole purpose of receiving alms, food, although some people do give or offer, and every morning so far I've been offered chai, little cup of chai, 2 cups of chai by one of the local chai shops, and the opportunity to sit, relax, enjoy a cup of chai with the locals, which isn't the normal formal routine for going on pindapat, arms round. One just walks, eyes down, but you must remember this is a Hindu area, not a Buddhist area, not a Buddhist country. It's appropriate to be a little flexible without breaching our rules of Vinaya, but a little flexible towards people's attitudes, especially when they're offering kindness. They would like you to sit and relax. Of course, also as monks, we cannot drink standing up, and I can't really pour a little cup of chai into my bowl. So I take that opportunity to just sit for a few moments. That's establishing part of the routine here. When I return, I wash my feet, because of course we go with barefoot. And anything that I've collected, take to the sala, the little place I showed in a previous video, where we eat together as monks there, as it is at the moment. That will be at about 11 o'clock, the meal time. No, as far as I know, no lay people, upasakas coming, bringing food here or anything. The food is provided by lay people, upasakas, whom are supplying the main monastery in Bangalore, which I imagine, I don't know for sure, is then brought to here to feed any monks in residence. So we're more than adequately provided for via Sanghadana through the organisation, which is well supported here in Karnataka, in Bangalore especially. Currently it's the weekend, so there are a few other young novice monks staying. You'll hear some noise in a minute because they're allowed to do all sorts of things that bhikkhus are not, because they have fewer rules. They can dig and work quite hard, so they're here helping out with the building work. They've been helping with the gardening work, and the building work is building some new kutis for monks' accommodation. And it's an opportunity for them to have a weekend away from their studies. They're very much in education, the young monks under the age of 20, the full Indian curriculum, and also Pali studies, Dharma studies in terms of the Pali scriptures, the Dhammapada. They learn all the chanting, and become very thoroughly versed in all aspects of Theravada Buddhism at a very early age. So ordained at an early age, and if they live lives as monks, become very established in this practice in terms of their understanding. And they are our teachers of the future, of course. The next thing on the day after about 11 o'clock, we have the meal. Then I'm relatively free. I'm free for most of the morning, free for most of the afternoon. At around, I don't really have any duties, so to speak, here, as I did previously in the last place. So opportunity to meditate more, read up, study if there's any areas of interest that I want to expand upon. But really for me it's about practice and practicing what I've learned so far. Not only in my monastic Buddhist monk life, but in my lay life. Here we are, there's shoveling up some aggregates, gravels, for the building work just across the way there. Usually 4 o'clock, cup of tea time, and then 6 o'clock we have evening puja. So morning puja and evening puja is around half an hour to 40 minutes of chanting and just about 10-15 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes meditation when we return to our kutis, or I return to my kuti to practice for the rest of the evening. Usually going to sleep at around 10 to wake up again the next day at 3. So that's my routine now, and I thought Sunday morning a good time, relaxed, to go through some of the questions that have been sent in and really just try and give you my perspective. I don't promise to answer your questions. I'm not necessarily an authority on any of these subjects, but my point of view might be helpful. If it is, I hope so, and you can use it. So getting on with that. Can you talk about what different tradition in Buddhism means, what rules and how different they are, and also what happens to female monks on lockdown, what generally female monks do? Okay, lockdown is a kind of phrase I've used for this Vassa period because we're not allowed to go anywhere for 3 months. We stay in the same residence, brought about by the Buddha in his time to stop the monks in the rainy season. And of course I'm in the land of the Buddha, so it is the rainy season, especially in the northeast where he was, although I'm in South India. Stop the monks wandering all over the countryside, ruining the crops, and also to protect them from the elements. So they used the opportunity to stay in one place, practice meditation, and in the Buddha's time that was it. Now it's often a time to study the Vinaya or study the scriptures and improve one's intellectual side of Buddhism, if that's your way. So that's just to explain that. Different traditions. Well, you know, we have, to put it simply, there's northern and southern. Southern tradition is generally Theravada and encompasses geographically Thailand, Myanmar and Sri Lanka. In the time of the Buddha, he encouraged his monks to go in all directions to expound the Dharma. Not to proselytize, not to preach, not to be evangelical, but to do simply as I described earlier, be seen, to provoke inquiry, and therefore the ability to then, on invitation, pass on the teachings of the Buddha. Not to convert, not to indoctrinate opinions, but to simply expound the truth of suffering, cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. Nothing more complicated than that, but the further one goes, the more opportunity there is to do that. So after the Buddha's time, monks traditionally throughout history have gone from this heart of Buddhism as it was originally in India, outwards, north, east, west, south. In the east, Thailand, south, Sri Lanka, mainly it began with Sri Lanka, and from there onwards to Thailand, Myanmar, where it's much stayed the same as the teachings of the Buddha, the original teachings, way of the elders, if you like, which is what Theravada means. Thera, elders, Vada, way. So Theravada became the established southern tradition. As it went further north, but also in that movement, it picked up local culture, colloquialisms, some aspects of local and even micro-local sort of states, or even villages and tribes. Their own traditions and religions and rites and rituals tend to get a little bit embedded in the actual practice, the actual teachings, because it's bound to pick up, like Chinese whispers, little bits of change, misinterpretation along the way, depending on who the listener is. So even in this immediate vicinity, you'll see that Theravada Buddhism in Myanmar, Thailand and Sri Lanka are three quite different religions, if you like, all called Theravada Buddhism. In Thailand itself, you have 2 or 3 very different traditions. You have, well, I won't go into breaking it all down, but even in each country, there you'll see monks in different coloured robes practicing in different ways. Essentially, wherever you go in the world, it boils down to the core teachings of the Buddha, based on the Tripitaka, the original scriptures, which you can read, and these being the word of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha, and are freely available these days online, and are all of the suttas, we call. In the southern tradition, Theravada, we use the Pali language. So I will always use Pali terminology when referring to Buddhist subjects like anicca, dukkha, anatta, sila, samadhi, panya. These are all Pali words. So as it moved north towards the Himalaya mountain range through Nepal, and of course the Buddha originally was born in Lumbini, Nepal, came from a village on the border of northern India and Nepal, which was called Kapilavastu. It's never quite sure where that was, whether it was in Nepal or in India, so there's one in each now, so that they can both have the benefit of that place. But it moved up back. He, of course, was more in northeast India, where he became enlightened and taught and lived. But it's moved up through the efforts of Padmasambhava, who was a saint, a prophet, if you like, in Buddhism, who went up into the foothills of the Himalayas. And of course, during this travel, and he was very much an ascetic practitioner, picked up many more aspects of the cultures in those regions, and we had the development of what is now known as Tibetan Buddhism. Again, very many different sections of that. What was the question before I go on too far? I'm going so much into this. Yes, so we call these different kinds of Buddhism traditions, because they're the traditional way of practicing Buddhism in the areas, the countries they come from. So that also then expands into that's the northern traditions, which are really Mahayana, Vajrayana, Tibetan. Tibetan really is kind of a bit Mahayana, Vajrayana, I think, from my understanding. Now, my knowledge, my experience is of Theravada, although initially I investigated what we consider in Western cultures as the 4 main types of Buddhism: Theravada, Mahayana, Tibetan, Vajrayana, and Zen, so 5. There's some sort of grey area between the Tibetan as to whether it's Vajrayana or Mahayana, in my opinion, because I don't know it well enough. But my investigations led me back to Theravada, which is where I began, because it was the simplest, and I'm a simple fellow who understands the simple teachings of the Buddha. And all of the stuff that's added on later by different cultures, I wasn't really so interested in. So I just saw that as additional dogmatic views and not necessary for the practice towards liberation. So it really changes, and that is what I mean when I say different tradition, is it could be of any of those traditions. So when someone asks me a question about green Tara or the Lotus Sutra, the Lotus Sutra is the Sanskrit word for sutta, which is the Pali word for a teaching of the Buddha. So you see we have these subtle but actual differences in the language used, Sanskrit for the northern traditions, Pali for the southern, and then the Lotus Sutra is an entirely different teaching, which doesn't really, it originates from the original teachings, but again has been adapted, and I would know nothing about. So my answer would be, well, that is of a different tradition. So I'm not qualified to answer that. I don't know. I can't know about all of the other traditions. So that's different traditions. What rules? But the rules are called the Vinaya. The rules, so what are the different rules? They are the same for all of the traditions. So the 5 precepts are the same. No killing, this is the thing that's most important to you. No killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or the taking of intoxicants. So it doesn't matter whether you're from the northern traditions or the southern traditions, a very simple, basic practicing tradition, or an extremely complicated and elaborate form like you see in some of the Tibetan presentations. If you just observe the ceremony and things that go on around the Dalai Lama or the Karmapa, these different things, it's all very elaborate, but it's still just 5 precepts are the core rules. And then for the monastics, the monks and nuns, there are 8 precepts, all for lay people, which mean there's celibacy, so no sexual activity, no entertainment, no perfume and beautification, no eating in the afternoon, and no sleeping in high luxurious beds. And then 10 precepts, they add on the no use of any money whatsoever. That is an applicable rule to all monks. If you see monks using money, then in effect they are not necessarily breaking the rule, because it's about interpretation. The rule is one must not handle gold, but gold was the money of the time. It was the currency in place, I think, at the time of the Buddha, which is why it's translated as gold. But essentially the meaning, the principle, the idea behind that rule, without getting into the semantics of its actual translation and so on and so forth, is just we don't use money. We rely on the support of lay people. Now, of course, there are occasions. If you donate money, say send some money in way of dana to me in order to top up the internet or something like that, you could say, well, I'm using money. Well, yes. The way it works, though, it doesn't go into my hands. I don't go to the shop. A kapia gets the money to go to the shop to get the internet. This is how we get round that kind of thing. There are very rare occasions where one would be on a bus in a remote part of India and you'd need to get a bus ticket. So I will carry this might answer another question coming later. I'll often carry, say, 100 rupee note in a little plastic bag. I'll usually carry that somewhere in my yam for an emergency like that, if I had to get a bus somewhere. And then I just give the bag to the conductor, the bus conductor, they still have those here, and he just takes the necessary money and puts the necessary change in the bag and pops it back in this yam bag hanging up here, or in my bowl if I just have my bowl. So I don't go out buying money. It's about shopping and money. I've expanded on that area a little too much too, but essentially all the rules are the same for all of the traditions. Also, what happens to female monks on lockdown? Right, female monks, in terms of our real titles, we're as fully ordained, having taken higher ordination, upasampada. Actually, that is my upasampada certificate, because I'm in India. It came from my monastery to here somehow. Someone brought it kindly. But I didn't have it in Thailand. It was just a copy on my phone for official purposes. However, when we've taken Upasampada, you are a bhikkhu, which means a homeless mendicant, that's all. A beggar, living on alms, reliant on alms to live this life as a samana, a religious, holy life as a monk, supported by lay people. If you're a female, you would be called a bhikkhuni. So a bhikkhuni, or a nun, a bhikkhu, or a monk, we don't live in the same accommodation, we have entirely separate accommodation. The bhikkhunis and nuns live in a same kind of environment, but full of bhikkhunis or nuns, females. And monks, the same. Monks, men, bhikkhus. Now, I know there may be some modern variations on that idea, but essentially men and women are kept separate because we're monks, nuns. You know, as a child, a teenager, you've heard, or your own teenagers, you've heard the expression, I'm not a nun, I'm not a monk, you know. It's often used in arguments with parents. It means that. A monk is a monk, a nun is a nun. You can't have a monk and a nun living together. It's entirely inappropriate. Although they work in close quarters in terms of most monasteries where the nuns live in Thailand, the nuns are in the same grounds but in separate accommodation. But the boundaries within our rules are so very defined. There's absolutely no contact. Even if someone wants to hand me something, say they want to hand me this spoon, a lady wants to hand me this spoon, I have to put a piece of cloth, which I don't have here, yes I do. I have this piece of cloth for this purpose. I'd put this piece of cloth there like that, and the lady would put the spoon on there, I don't know whether you can see it, and I'd pull the spoon like this, you see. That much detail in it. The lady cannot hand me this spoon. In Thailand, at customs, for instance, and excise, well, not customs and excise, you know, the immigration part of the airport, I have to put the passport on the side, and the lady would pick it up if it was a lady immigration office, and vice versa. She'd put the passport on the side, and then I'd pick it up. If you try and hand it to the lady, she would not accept it, because all females in Thailand know that this is a rule. She cannot touch. That's it. So, yeah, I've expanded on that also so much. What do female monks on lockdown? So they just stay in their same place. So they again go to maybe another monastery or the same monastery where they live all the time, and they also don't go anywhere during the 3 months. Now also with bhikkhunis, I won't try not to go into this too much, they generally don't go on alone on these tudongs, because that may be considered I don't know, a sexist opinion or view. It's just traditional, they don't. I mean, they can now. I don't think there's a particular rule. There are rules about this, but I won't go into all of that. That's for you to ask. There are some very, very good bhikkhunis around with all the answers to these questions currently, so you can find out about that from them. I'm saying that because you might be a female who's, I'm sure, I'm reading the question, I'm assuming you probably are, but I wouldn't know because I haven't got the name here, just the question. And even the name sometimes doesn't help me because you use these not your names on the comments, what you'd call them, whatever, a username. So someone XYZ1234, I don't know whether that's a boy or a girl. So you do the same, and generally what do female monks do? They generally do the same as male monks. Monks and nuns, we do the same thing. We are practicing towards freeing our minds of the defilements, the root defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, by practicing sila, moral virtue, meditation or samadhi, meditation, and developing wisdom, panya, developing wholesome mind states and reducing unwholesome mind states. So I think I need to find a very quick question to answer now, because that one I've really expanded upon further than I should have perhaps. But it's been a while since I've sat and made a proper time to answer questions, hasn't it? Okay, quick one. How can I join a monastery? Well, I've made a couple of videos about that. Generally, how I became a monk, how to just have to scroll through the videos really. One most recently was my ordination experience. So that's a long story how I did it. How can you do it? It depends where you are, which country, and in that country where you are located. And if you're prepared to travel, because if you're not in a place where there is access to a Buddhist monastery, you would need to travel. Maybe you'd need to travel to a different country. If you're in my own country, there are Buddhist monasteries in my own country, so you only have to travel within the country. You turn up, you experience living in a monastery, but if you're not local, you want to write to them first. They will only allow you to stay for a few days at first, or not even that. You need to visit a couple of times beforehand, so they get to know you and you get to know them, the lifestyle. And that's how it begins. So it rather depends, but I've made quite a few, and generally I refer to this subject often in the course of these talks. So if you have the opportunity to listen to more, you'll pick up the idea generally. It'll come up again as a subject for sure, but now's not the time. Will you have unshaved eyebrows in India? Well, that's a funny question. Well, of course, in Thailand, as I've mentioned before, we have to shave our eyebrows because it's the Thai Forest tradition, and all monks shave their eyebrows in Thailand. It was a way of identifying monks during the Mongolian invasions, because the invaders were masquerading as monks to infiltrate villages and attack. So the monks cleverly decided, if we shave our eyebrows off, we'll spot an invader, because he'll still be a monk, but he'll have their eyebrows. We'll know he's fake. I guess I'll continue because I'm planning to go back to Thailand, and also it is part of my tradition. With eyebrows, I don't feel without eyebrows odd. I don't really, way I look, feel odd anyway, really. But if I was in Thailand and I'd forgotten my eyebrows, for instance, you would provoke inquiry. People would look, hey, what's wrong with this monk? He's got eyebrows. Because they are so used to, there's 300, maybe 400,000 monks in Thailand. None of them have eyebrows. So if you've got big eyebrows sticking out, you're going to stand out. And maybe they'll think you're a Mongolian invader. I don't know. So probably we'll see how it goes with that one. I don't know. And finally, what is intention? Is it thought or idea or action? What is intention? Is it thought or idea or action? Well, simply, intention is the thought that leads to the action. So intention is the thought that leads to the action. So it's a bit of both. I think the time's up there, so we'll wrap this one up for today. And I hope if there's something useful there, you can use it. If not, you can just leave it. And I'll speak to you again soon. Thank you for watching. Namaste.